Here's William Lane Craig to misunderstand what the beginning of the universe is.
I know that the second point about everything that begins to exist, that has obviously, in some circles, is more controversial.
Yeah.
So I would be curious to hear what you say about that.
Mhm.
So I'll take that question first. That'll be.
Yes. Let's review. The first premise is that everything that begins to exist has a cause of its beginning. Now, as you say, I think that's hardly controversial. Things don't just pop into existence out of nothing.
Regardless of whether the universe had a beginning, or whether it has existed for an infinite amount of time, it didn't pop into existence out of nothing. For something to pop into existence, there would have to have been a time when it wasn't already in existence. Regardless of whether the universe had a beginning or not, there was never a time when it wasn't already in existence. The universe is the space-time continuum, so by definition, there could never have been a time before the universe existed. The universe didn't pop into existence out of nothing because there never was nothing. Also, the idea that the universe came into existence out of nothing is what Craig believes. He believes that God created the universe out of nothing. Just as we never see anything pop into existence out of nothing, we also never see anything get created out of nothing. So if the idea that something popped into existence out of nothing is absurd, so is the idea of something being created out of nothing. When this is pointed out to Craig, he doesn't deny this. Instead, he just says that the idea that the universe popped into existence out of nothing without God is even more absurd. However, I don't believe that the universe popped into existence at all, so my view avoids both absurdities.
Out of nothing, nothing comes.
Unless God makes that happen, right? Gotta get that special pleading in there.
So if something begins to exist, there must be a cause that brings that thing into being. I think that's quite perspicuous.
I could understand having that view if there was a time when the universe did not exist, followed by a time when it does. In that case, a change occurred, so it makes sense to ask what caused the change. However, if there was never a time when the universe did not exist, even if it didn't exist for an infinite amount of time, then no change occurred. So there's nothing to explain.
So the more controversial premise is the second one, that the universe began to exist. And here I would marshal both philosophical arguments as well as scientific arguments in support of this premise. Concerning philosophical arguments, a medieval Jewish philosopher like Saadia Ben Gurion defended arguments for the beginning of the universe on purely philosophical grounds, showing that there cannot have been an infinite regress of past events.
Yeah, that argument, I think, was pretty conclusively debunked by Bertrand Russell, who said that there's no problem with an infinite regress because there's no logical problem with the idea of a series with no first term. I don't think there has been an infinite regress, but there's no logical problem with one.
And therefore, Saadia claimed there must have been an absolutely first event which was brought into being by a transcendent creator.
What does transcendent mean in this context? If it means that the creator exists independent of space-time, then that means that such a creator exists nowhere and never.
And I'm persuaded that these purely philosophical arguments are sound arguments and have defended them in my published work. What is incredible is that since the second decade of the 20th century, there has been accumulating increasingly scientific evidence or confirmation of this second premise. And I have reference here to two things. First would be the discovery of the expansion of the universe and the Big Bang model of the origin of the universe, which shows that the universe cannot be past eternal, but must have had an absolute beginning.
He largely gets this idea from the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, which one of the authors, Alan Guth, says does not prove what Craig thinks it does.
Now, you might think that, there's a theorem by Alan Guth and Arvind Borde and Alex Vilenkin that says the universe had a beginning. I've explained to you why that's not true, but in case you don't trust me, I happen to have Alan Guth right here, one of the authors of the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem. Alan, what do you say? He says, I don't know whether the universe had a beginning. I suspect the universe didn't have a beginning. It's very likely eternal, but nobody knows. Now, how in the world can the author of the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem say the universe is probably eternal? For the reasons I've already told you. The theorem is only about classical descriptions of the universe, not about the universe itself.
Over the decades since this was first proposed in the 1920s, there has been a parade of alternative theories trying to avert the beginning of the universe predicted by the Standard Model. We've seen oscillating models, vacuum fluctuation models, steady state models. And over again, these theories have been shown to be either mathematically untenable or physically impossible, or they actually wind up implying the very origin of the universe that they sought to avoid. And so the evidence is such that a cosmologist like Alexander Vilenkin, a preeminent astrophysicist at Tufts University, can say that all the evidence we have says that the universe had a beginning.
Yeah, but Alan Guth, who authored the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem with Alexander Vilenkin, says differently.
Now, that's a remarkable statement. Think about it. Vilenkin does not say that the evidence for a beginning outweighs the evidence against a beginning. No, he says all the evidence we have says that the universe had a beginning.
His view is clearly not unanimously held among even his closest colleagues.
In fact, I'm not aware of any evidence that the universe is past eternal. What evidence we have is all on one side of the scale. And so I think that makes it highly probable that, in fact, the second premise is true, that the universe began to exist.
Even if it began to exist in the sense that it hasn't existed for an infinite amount of time, it didn't begin to exist in the sense that it popped into existence, or was created out of nothing, because that would imply that there was a time when it didn't exist. Even if it hasn't existed for infinite time, there was still never a time when it didn't already exist, and you can't create something at a time when it already exists.
In addition to that, there's also scientific confirmation from the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics shows that the universe cannot be projected into past infinity. Rather, there must have been a beginning a finite time ago in which the energy of the universe was simply put in as an initial condition.
You can't put in energy when there was never a time when that energy wasn't already in.
And since then, the energy level has been running down, just like a clock that has been wound up and is gradually running down.
Well, no, the energy isn't running down. The amount of usable energy is. But we don't know how much usable energy there has been in the past. If it's been declining from infinity, then it can decline for an infinite amount of time.
And so we have very positive and powerful scientific evidence in support of that second premise that the universe began to exist.
And even if we go past, because I know that this is a little bit out of my depth, but I know you discussed this with Roger Penrose, that there's time, there's like ordinary space time, and then there's, of course, before that, there's still cause and effect in the sense of temporal order time. Is that correct?
No, there's no temporal order time before time. That doesn't make any sense.
Like, even if we were to say before the Big Bang, there would be time in a certain sense.
In physical cosmology, Ben, there is no time before the Big Bang. That is inept to say what was before the Big Bang. That's like asking what is north of the North Pole. The initial cosmological singularity in the Standard Model simply represents the beginning of time, and space-time cannot be projected further backwards than that. Now, as a philosopher, however, and metaphysician, I think it is coherent to talk about a sort of metaphysical time that existed prior to the inception of physical time.
Word salad. I use Bertrand Russell's definition of physical, which is that which is dealt with by physics. I don't know what metaphysical time is supposed to be if it isn't the kind of time that appears in physics equations.
And I think a knockdown argument for that would be that God could count down to the moment of creation. -3, -2, -1, let there be light.
So there can be time before the Big Bang. It's just this woo-woo magical time that can be used in a special pleading argument.
And in that case, there would be a series of mental events that would be sufficient for time even prior to the inception of the physical universe. So I think it is possible to have a kind of metaphysical time prior to creation, though I see no basis for postulating that sort of pre-creation time, and indeed I don't think it could be infinitely extended. And therefore, I adopt Occam's razor here. You don't postulate entities or hypotheses beyond necessity. I think it's simpler simply to say that time began at the moment of creation.
It's also more coherent to avoid inferring the existence of some special kind of time that resembles actual time but doesn't count as an extension of the space-time continuum for some reason. Theologically, the idea of metaphysical time would be a problem as well, because it would mean that God did not create the universe out of nothing, but rather from a position when this special kind of time existed. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.